6.3, Impact and Reconstruction. Your objective for today is students will be able to analyze the impact of Reconstruction by completing a Reconstruction overview. You're going to take a decent amount of notes on impact and Reconstruction, so you may want a page for impact and a page for Reconstruction, again, setting it up Cornell note style. The impact. Over 600,000 men died during the war. This was the deadliest U.S. war that was ever fought. In 1863, so again, this is right around Gettysburg, President Lincoln and Congress passed the draft law, and this said that all men between the ages of 20 to 45 had to register. However, there was a caveat. If you had $300, you could pay to get out of the draft. So what this meant is anybody who had money didn't fight in the Civil War. Anybody who was poor had to fight in the Civil War. So this caused a huge conflict and controversy in our country and a huge division between rich and poor. And eventually this led to the idea of the draft riots. A lot of white men were angered because they lost their jobs to freed blacks. And they were upset about it, and then they didn't want to have to serve in the war, and they didn't have the $300 to pay to get out of the war. And so they began a riot in New York City. The ending result was that 12 African Americans were lynched because of this, and again just showed kind of the big divide between rich and poor in our country. The Republican Congress, remember Lincoln was a Republican at this time, so his Congress did support him. And they decided to expand the government role in economic issues and promote business development during the Civil War. So they voted to expand the railroad, and the Transcontinental Railroad was completed in 1869, so just a few years after the war ended. They also passed what we call the Homestead Act, and this is where you could pay $10 to move west of the Mississippi and get 160 acres of land. So that was a lot of land back then. And still is a lot of land today. They also established the Morrill Act, which gave states money to establish universities. So in addition to trying to get people to move westward, people in these westward states could apply for this, and they could build and create universities to educate the young people that moved out there. However, there was a lot of inflation and shortages because of the war. So the South lacked a lot of food after the war. A lot of Southern farmers continued to grow cotton despite the urge to grow food. They wanted to grow cotton to make the money, but then the South didn't have the food that they needed. In the North, we saw that bankers and factory owners did really, really well because you needed to produce a lot of goods during this time period. However, ordinary workers, even though they were making more money, suffered a lot because of the high prices of inflation, because prices were so expensive that even though they were making more money, it didn't help them at all. We also, again, just like the Revolutionary War, saw women start to step up. We saw them running farms and businesses as their husbands went off to war. They were paid a lot less than men, obviously. But one of the things that women were able to do was they were able to manage with scarce resources. Many of the resources went to the war effort, so you didn't have the same resources that they had before. And women learned how to create and make things without the resources that they were used to or accustomed to. We also saw women step up into the war effort. This is a picture of Rose O'Neal Greenhow, who ended up being a Confederate spy during the Civil War. The war was mostly fought on Southern soil, which resulted in a lot of destroyed Southern land. So a lot of destroyed farms, railroads, factories, and then again, everything between Atlanta and Savannah was completely burned and destroyed. Reconstruction was an attempt to reconstruct the Union and to allow slaves or freed slaves a way back into the Union. And it actually began on January 1st of 1863 with the Emancipation Proclamation. It lasted until Ulysses S. Grant ended it on March 31st of 1877. On April 14th of 1865, President Lincoln was assassinated and Johnson became president. There is a belief that if Lincoln would have lived and survived, that Reconstruction would have been much more successful, as Lincoln did a good job of being able to compromise between both sides, where Johnson was not as good at that. So Reconstruction was viewed as a complete failure. Some of the political views during Reconstruction were radical Republicans, so these were extreme Republicans, and they felt that the South needed to be punished. And they wanted to ensure that they established voting rights for African Americans. And then you had a group of moderates who their main focus was just to reunite the country and just to bring everybody back together. President Johnson gave complete control of Reconstruction to the radical Republicans, which is part of the reason why it was not as successful as it could have been. He was eventually impeached in 1868 because he didn't support the radical Republicans after giving them their power. At the beginning, because again, radical Republicans were in control and they wanted to punish the South, Southern states were not allowed back into the Union, and they were under military control. This caused a huge backlash of discrimination in the South against the blacks and against freed slaves, led to things like black codes, which were laws that prevented blacks from being able to have the same rights as whites, in addition to Jim Crow laws. Jim Crow is based off of a character, which you see right here on the right-hand side, and led to a lot of discriminatory laws, especially voting laws. In 1867, we saw the Reconstruction Act, which said that Southern states needed to ratify or pass the 14th Amendment in order to rejoin the Union. The Freedmen's Bureau was also established, which provided homes, clothing, food, and fuel and medicine. Again, was kind of considered a failure. It wasn't as successful as it should have been as far as establishing proper homes and education for freed slaves. There were 3 post-war amendments that were added to the U.S. Constitution, the 13th, the 14th, and the 15th. The 13th abolished slavery officially. The 14th Amendment said anyone born in the United States is a citizen and they deserve legal equality. And then the 15th Amendment said that no man may be denied the right to vote because of race. So again, this did not give women the right to vote, but it did give all men the right to vote. And then in 1877 was the Compromise of 1877, and this ended military occupation in the South and therefore ended Reconstruction. And that is it for today.